philosopher.
What's up? What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host. Messed that up a little bit. Ricardo Brandes, also known as Ricky Brandes, and a great episode for you today. Today we have returning guest, somebody who's been on the Ripple Effect Podcast recently, and also the Union of the Unwanted a few times recently. And if you listen to those recent episodes, you'll know that there's tons of different topics that Dr. Alexander can expand on, and that's exactly what we do today. Today, we take the time to really expand on all the different topics that Dr. Alexander is intrigued with and much more. We get it more into her history, more into her writing, more into just about everything. And of course, as always, if you want to learn more about Dr. Alexander or keep up with her latest work, check out the links in the show description. As always, the links will always be there for my guests. Also, if you want to support the show, you can find those links also in the show description. No matter how you're watching or listening to the Ripple Effect Podcast, the links are always there. There's tons of ways you can support the show. You can support the show just by rating, reviewing, subscribing, leaving comments, and helping those algorithms favor shows like these, which are typically suppressed and not favored by the algorithm. But if you are in a good financial situation, please consider sending a one-time donation via Venmo, PayPal, supporting us monthly on Patreon, or checking out our merch store, which has tons of cool logos, designs. Get yourself a thought-provoking t-shirt or hoodie. The quality is amazing, and you get some cool merch and support a show you like at the same time. Also, check out my solo music project called Theory 6, my brand new song called Digital Disease, which we discussed today on the show just briefly. And that's about it. The only other thing I need to mention is our Zoom call. I had the wrong mic setting on, so it was recorded via webcam and not my higher quality mic. So if you want to hear a higher quality version of this podcast, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify, iTunes, Podcast Addict, or whatever podcast app you use. Because the audio is recorded locally on my end, and I also record it in Pro Tools, so I have some ability to clean it up if need be. The audio version of the podcast will always be the best audio version of the podcast. So if you want to put faces to the names, I get it. Watch us on YouTube. But if you want to listen to the show from start to finish, you might want the best quality version of the audio, so make sure you subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Thanks, and enjoy this amazing conversation with Dr. Alexander, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
I'm such a creature of habit, and I like, once I get used to doing something a certain way, I'm just like, okay. Like, I don't want to learn something new. I'm like, it works. So, like, why change it?
No, I know. And habit can really save our lives sometimes because for me, anyway, I'm very absent-minded. And so if I've got a habit that keeps me on track,
So I'm the exact same way. I'm like, I get so OCD about things too. I'm like, I don't know. It's like most of our things in our lives. Like, there are a lot of our maybe a lot of our flaws that some people would look at as flaws are also what get things done and maybe motivate us, and we use as tools to accomplish things. I know with myself, like a lot of my OCD, that's a part of it where I have to get things done or it'll drive me crazy. I can't stop thinking about it. So like I had a song that I was working on like a month or so ago called Digital Disease, actually about AI and transhumanism and all these topics. And it was fascinating because I was using AI to not write the song because I wrote the lyrics, but to actually create some of the guitar riffs and drum beats and whatnot. So I was using AI to basically create the song and bring it to life. And I couldn't sleep at night. I would stay up late at night. I'd go through the lyrics and I'm like, dude, I think I know what I don't like about that verse. Let me change this. Let me change it. And then next thing you know, you spend all night trying to finish it. I remember woke up like in the morning and I'm like, I think I got the song done. And my wife's like, you're crazy. I'm like, why? She's like, I heard you all night just playing the song over and over again. and going through the lyrics. I'm like, yeah, I know. But I'm like, that's also,
You have to do. I recommend too that when you can't sleep at night, because you're thinking, just get up and do it. Don't lie there thinking about it. Just get up and do it, and then you'll get back to sleep sooner, probably.
yeah, or you won't sleep, but and then the next day you'll sleep like a baby.
But that's interesting that you're using AI. I've certainly seen the progression of using. My son is a musician, and he does a lot of the composing on with the tools that where you can. I don't know what they're called. Ableton, I guess, maybe.
Is that the name of the program? Yeah, I've heard that one. There's the one called Suno that's really popular. I think it's like one of the top 10 most downloaded apps of 2025. I think we had in 2025 like the first AI musician or artist like rank on like billboards or something like that, having a song that ranked. I've had a lot of
I just meant he was using the computer tools where electronic music where you could put a drum beat in and it was wanted him to work with real musicians, analog, get that experience, and he did as a kid. And so you go, oh man, he's composing everything online now with a computer, but he does also get offline and play some guitar riffs or make some sounds and things like that. So all of these things are just more tools that you're adding to your toolkit. I'm sure when the electronic piano came, that made it easier for a lot of people to play piano. You can put it in, you don't have this big thing that's hard to fit into a house. Let's see what happens with AI being used for art forms. So far, I wouldn't have it write for me. Like you say, you can't have it write your lyrics because it doesn't think with your brain. You've got something to say. Why would you ask somebody else to say it for you? But I don't think it's going to take away so many jobs as everyone's talking about.
You're optimistic in regards to that?
I am. For me, maybe the jobs that it could take would be this sort of, like, for instance, it can write summaries. If your job was to write summaries, I don't know, what were you doing? Just writing summaries of stuff that everybody already knows and is easily available. I don't know.
I think there's going to be a little bit of both. I think there is going to be, I coach this girl who her dad's an attorney, and I remember during the fall season, won't be long until AI takes my job. And he was joking around about that. And I'm like, yeah, that is probably one of those jobs that you could get some legal advice or have somebody dissect a law or whatnot or paperwork for much cheaper if you use AI than paying an attorney to do. And so there are like little things, maybe even filing paperwork, because a lot of like attorney stuff is you're paying them to file paperwork. And a lot of people just don't think they have the know-how to do it themselves. So if you have AI and you can ask, or maybe you can eliminate some of that workload that you usually sub out to a attorney. So things like that. But you're right, there is also a bit of a lot of the things you're asking people or you're asking it to do are things that typically like you wouldn't really hire somebody to do specifically anyways.
Yeah, I can use it for things that I hate to do, which is fill out forms. I have a proposal of some kind and it has to fit into this grant format. Fill it in for me. Yes. And I think that's great because I always resisted that kind of thing, writing in a formulaic way. I absolutely abhor it. And if I can get a machine to do that for me. But the other day I'm reviewing someone's book. And in the beginning of the review, you have to do a summary. And I just hate that part because it's just like the author is blah, blah, blah. And so I said, I'll put his intro in and I'll ask ChatGPT to give me a 250 word summary. And it did. And I looked at it and I just went through and rewrote everything. That's not what I would have focused on. No, I wouldn't have. And no, that's not worth mentioning. And I changed the entire thing. But it was worth doing because it got me to start. It's much easier to rewrite something than it is to start writing when you don't want to write that thing. Summaries are just painful to write. So I used it as a tool to get me started on this review. So that's fine. But I wouldn't ask it to review it for me because I have an opinion that I want to express.
Exactly. And I think you could almost use it as the same way if you have like a board meeting, or if you have any type of meeting whatsoever where you bring some people together and you're brainstorming and you're bouncing things off each other. You might have somebody who suggests a idea you don't agree with, but in that suggestion, there might be a piece that you like and you enjoy, or maybe you want to use. And it's like the same thing with AI, where you can ask it to do something or come up with a idea, and maybe you don't like the idea, maybe it's not the exact idea you're going to use, but you can get something out of that to, like you said, to get the ball rolling and start the process and maybe spark.
Brainstorming is like that. Some friends and I were working on putting together a grant proposal for something, and we're working at kind of high level, odd, fringy science kind of stuff. Not fringy, but it's just not very common. And AI, unknown to us, AI recorded the Zoom conversation and then gave us the summary of it. And it didn't it couldn't comprehend the language that we were using. And so it transformed it into something that was easier to understand, more common. It changes everything into a consensus opinion. So if you're trying to express something that's not in the consensus opinion, it'll move it back over to what you're trying to get away from.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so there is benefits to it. Like you said, I look at it a lot like it's a tool. And I know, like I've talked to, and it's hard because I do come from the background of, I love drawing, I love painting, I love poetry, I love music, I love being anything that was creative and sparked imagination I enjoyed. And then I looked at AI and I'm just like, okay, there's a lot of artists that are very much against it. But if you go throughout history, it's like, hey, Pro Tools was looked down upon. Like people wanted things recorded on tape. So it's like you always have this romantic just love for the way things have been done in the past. But if we can get to, and I've said this over and over again on the show, it's called the gap between the imagination, the creation in your imagination, and then bringing it to life. If I can shrink in that gap and I can get to the thing that is playing in my head, the song, for example, that's playing in my head, if I can create that faster, closer to what I'm hearing in my head, what I want to create, if it helps me get there faster, then like, why is it a bad thing? And like you said, even like the piano is no different. I have a keyboard right here. Like it's no different. If I can play the accordion sound on that piano without having to pump an accordion, without having to hold an accordion, without doing all that extra work that's required to play an accordion. And being Portuguese, unfortunately, I'm very familiar with accordions. But the thing is, so you look at an accordion player and you could look down upon somebody who's playing an electric accordion on a keyboard. Hey, you're not putting in any of that work, or you didn't put in any of the hours and hours that's required to learn how to hold it correctly, how to use both hands, how to pump it, and how when it inhales and exhales, how it affects the sound, all these things. You're cheating, you're cutting corners, right? And it's same thing with like electric guitar to acoustic guitar. Acoustic guitar, you have to be mistake free, or you're going to hear it. Where electric guitar, you play with this distortion, you're not going to hear it if you're not holding the frets correctly, if you didn't hit the chord correctly. It hides some of that. So technology has always helped out. And when you look at even electronic music, people have already accepted digital music. Tiesa, Van Buren, like all these, David Guetta, like all these guys, Dead Mouse, like they just copy and paste things, and they use drum machines, and they remix things and do mashups of different songs. They don't actually play anything, but yet you go to these music festivals, there's all these people experiencing this moment together. They feel it. They seem to be attracted to it and connect with it. So I guess like this idea of, hey, people aren't going to connect with it because it's digital or whatever. I don't know. I think as long as there's some human aspect to it, because even like the song Digital Disease I wrote recently, like it was my lyrics. It was basically, I started with a melody and the lyrics, and I knew what was going to be the chorus and how I wanted it to sound. And then I just used AI with actual instruments, but AI to recreate what I was looking for. And I would go over and over again, okay, regenerate, change this, change that. But at the end of the day, it was still my imagination. It was what was in my imagination that I was trying to recreate. So I don't think AI by itself, if I said, hey, write a song about transhumanism, I think it's probably going to suck, right? But it still requires, and I guess this kind of goes back to your point, because of that human element is always required, or always seems to be required for the most part. I do think people should be a little bit more hopeful about AI and if it's going to be a tool or is it going to be something that's going to completely take over our lives? And then we can get more conspiratorial and talk about people transitioning to the digital world, using it for everything. The podcasts that people are generating with fake people, and they'll just take an article, they're like, create a podcast, two people talking about the subjects in this article, and then they post it, or the videos that are completely fake, or the Instagram models that are completely fake and AI. So when you go down that rabbit hole, you're like, okay, maybe I'm not so optimistic. Maybe
Well, a friend of mine, Peter Duke of the Duke Report, quite often does the AI generated podcast on a podcast that he did, does a replay of it, a kind of shortened version. And I'm not sure why he did this, but he got the original version of my dissertation and put it into the podcast format. And he had these two robots talking about it, a man and a woman. And then I did a video showing myself listening to and reacting to the podcast. So there's just these many layers. And at first I'm impressed. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's right. That is what I set out to do. But then I realized they're just summarizing my introduction, which explained what I was intending to do. And okay, yeah, that's just basically a summary. But then when, like I said, whenever they got to the point where I was trying to do something new in philosophy, and I was abandoning the way that we used to think about this idea and coming up with something completely novel, they would just turn that right back into the thing that I was trying to overcome without skipping a beat, because nobody ever says those 7 words strung together in the way that I did. They don't have a consensus opinion for that kind of thing. And also I listened to I made my reaction video. It was about 30 minutes long, and I was getting sleepy listening to it. You can see me in the video, just like literally dropping off. But if you read my book, if you read my dissertation, there's a lot of comedy in there. I try to bring in interesting points. And so, yeah, if you want to kind of have boring summaries that are very formulaic, then. But I think the problem is not that we have to fear is these tools. Like you said, it sounds like you're using it like an artist would. Our problem has been an economic one where we have very few people controlling the music industry that are just banking on this very formulaic sound, worked and made us a lot of money. So let's do something just like that with a little bit of difference. And so that's the main problem that we have in arts, is the capture of corporations, corporate art. In publishing, we have something similar. I'm a literary fiction novelist. And the things that there isn't really a genre for literary fiction, artistically wrought sentences, stylized, highly stylized language that doesn't really exist anymore. Everything's kind of just plain English. It could be, there's no interpretation necessary to the words. There's no subtext or anything like that. So art in writing has disappeared. And just because publishers have to when they bring out a book, they've got all these expenses, advertising and placing it in the New York Times Review and so forth. And so they really only want to have to do that to one book and get the largest audience possible. You don't want to do 100 different books and have little niche audiences everywhere. Everybody's got to read one book this season. And so it's just art just doesn't lend itself to the big corporate idea of profit, that you have to produce the product that sells the most.
Yeah, music's no different, where they want music that the masses enjoy, right? That the majority of the people who listen to radio or like pop music or whatever, the niche little subgenres, they have a cult following, and those are usually the subgenres that I enjoy. I loved electronic music. I loved industrial music. I loved death metal, deathcore, metal, all the different, anybody that was pushing the boundaries, I was intrigued with. I'm like, oh, this is a different way of playing music, or that's a different way of playing metal, or that's a different type of music. Even the industrial scene, I forget what the band was that kind of gets the credit for starting the industrial scene, but a big part of their worldview was like, why does music always have to be a guitar, bass, and drums? Why can't it be like sounds and noises and stuff like that, and push those boundaries? And yeah, I love that. And that's one thing that AI won't be able to do, is I don't think it'll be able to do as well as a human, is this idea of coming up with new ideas. A lot of times they're just
No.
regurgitating old ideas that have already exist. And do you think the time will come where eventually they'll be able to take ideas that exist already and then no?
No, because the way that these neural networks it's just induction, inductive inference. And the older computers were deductive inference, where you would put in rules, 2 + 2 = 5. And the computer could follow the programmed rules and reliably output the right answer. With this new way of computing, it's more like a selection process where over time the nodes become wired together, or regularized, or weighted is the word, to output the most common type of pattern given that response. And so they can only generalize. So you can use them for, if you have a database with a lot of patterns in it. For instance, we have medical records that, as long as you are able to tag them, and we could trace, so that children got their vaccinations at this particular time, what sort of health outcomes did they have later in life compared to kids that got no vaccines. If you just give a machine learning neural network that kind of problem, it will find the pattern that maybe a lot of the people right now in medicine can't see because of their biases or don't want to look. So it could be useful for finding patterns that we're just not expecting to find. Like we just don't think that correlation between A and B could possibly exist, so we won't look at it, or we'll ignore it when we're going through the data. So I think that even a trained LLM, large language model, can find patterns. So yeah, but that's just making a generalization. There's this pattern that exists in the data, and it can do that. So in that way, it can discover something that we didn't know. But it's not going to come up with a novel hypothesis. A hypothesis is when something surprising happens in the world, and you say, I wonder if that could be correlation between this and this, and nobody's made that correlation before. And then you test that. By the way the computers are designed, they can't do that kind of thing. It's not the sort of thing that computers do. And I have a Substack called Posthumous Style, where I critique AI and transhumanism. And I have an article there that I wrote in response to a Dark Horse episode with Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine, where he gives an example. Google claimed that they had an AI that had discovered a hypothesis in the pharmaceutical industry and a potential new cancer drug. And I looked at the paper, consider where it's coming from. Google's got their next quarter earnings that they want to hype up the idea. And maybe if you believed them, you might say, yeah. But I looked at it and I said, no, this is just, it came up with what the prompt asked it to do. And it didn't provide a new hypothesis.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And that's the thing, like, it will be good at picking up on patterns that maybe our own personal beliefs could prevent us from seeing or noticing. But there's also personal beliefs in the writing of the AI. So the conclusion that the AI come up with could at times also be motivated by whoever programmed it and their perspectives, right? Gemini, for example, my kids have it on their tablet. And I remember my daughter wanted to change the voice of Gemini to an English sounding voice for whatever reason. I'm like, well, at least it'll sound smarter. But she couldn't, she asked it to give her a female voice, and it didn't see gender. It wouldn't recognize, or it wouldn't relate any of the sounds to a gender when it was obviously a female gender. And I'm like, okay, this is a little bit of wokeism getting involved. And you
Yeah,
see,
those are the AI company adding guardrails to the LLM, which are unnatural for what an LLM doesn't really have guardrails. It's almost like they're trying to take the older form of computing where you had the pre-programmed rules that they had to follow, and they're putting a layer on top of that, which just makes it awkward and stupid. Right? It's not rational because there'd be no reason why you couldn't use a female voice or a male voice or ask for one and have a preference. So it doesn't know how to apply those rules in a way that makes sense. I don't know where.
I know that there has been, and I've heard Rogan talk about it and others, like asking AI specific questions, and then some of wokeism ideology would influence the answer that they get. And again, like these are still programs that are, at the end of the day, the origin story is still from the hands of man, right? Somebody's programming it, somebody's ideas and whatnot are going into the way this machine works, this artificial intelligence works. So it makes sense that you're going to have some of their worldview influence some of the outcomes. I guess ideally, in the perfect world, when you've heard people talk about it, and I want to get into it a little bit because I did find out that you did run for office once, right? And you were a little involved with the Green Party and the Libertarian Party and whatnot. So I'm curious on if politicians can eventually fix things. Should we put any faith in man? Or like some people, and I guess that's the point I was getting to, some people believe that maybe we should put our faith in AI, some type of neutral party that doesn't have a financial motive to push for something or don't push for something, but can come to conclusions based on what's best for humanity. I guess I've already reflected a little bit of my own opinions on that. I still think man will have some influence on what that outcome is. But what's your thoughts?
I've thought a lot about that. And I want to say too that I wanted to talk about some of the things that came up when we were in the Union of the Unwanted, and there was a discussion of SFI, Santa Fe Institute, and whether or not they had anything to do with this transhumanist science and so forth. And I was looking through Courtney Turner wrote about that. And I was looking through some of her analysis of Santa Fe Institute. Of course, I don't know everything. I only know about what was going on when I was there. And one of the things that she was discussing was something called Game B. And it was a think tank situation. Brett Weinstein was involved in it. And they were thinking of a way they're recognizing that our current system is totally wrong, completely corrupt, and causing wealth disparity and no agency among the voters and so forth. And so they're trying to figure out a way. How would you design an economy? How would you design a government system that would be more fair, equitable, and so forth? And that kind of thing was what you would talk about at the Santa Fe Institute. The point of complex system science, the great revelation, was that with complex systems of society or so forth, you can't have the top-down control. Intelligent systems don't work that way. Intelligent systems are like environments, ecologies, where every player in the environment, everything in the niche is contributing something and taking something. And there's all this immediate reciprocity and the most successful organisms are not the ones that compete the most and that have the most offspring, but the ones that are able to support an ecological environment. There's a lot of give and take, and they're not extracting things from the environment. So those are the kinds of things that we were talking about. And I felt, and there were a lot of, Stuart Kaufman is a great philosopher that came out of Santa Fe Institute. We thought it would open up a new cultural revolution where we didn't depend on leaders experts to come up with the ideas, that we would that we would have a real democratic society and a way to value everyone's input. Self-organization was one of the big things that everyone talked about. And so after GOG, I'm getting to my run for Congress in 2020 and in 2018 too. Coming out of that, when I decided to get into politics, that gave me a scientific basis for the idea of decentralizing power, which is another way to say libertarianism. Our idea of electing representatives is probably not a very good idea. And we need, as much as we can limit that as possible, we should. We will always have leaders. We will always have managers because people are busy specializing and doing other things. So there's got to be somebody that's minding everything and reporting back and so forth. But not leaders. Power corrupts. And we've invested too much power in our representatives. And we need to, as far as I'm concerned, I think that that government should be the buildings and grounds department and should handle mass transportation and roads and build schools and build hospitals and run the communication lines and so forth and build all those things and maintain it. But I think local cooperative governments with people involved should be running them. Absolutely no top-down control. When government has worked well, it has done things like that. The Soviets built a wonderful train system. It's just absolutely phenomenal, their subway system. It's like a palace underground, literally like a palace with chandeliers and marble floors and everything. So government can do that really well because basically they can print money and build infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And I think another topic I want to talk to you about that I think this kind of can push us in that direction is this idea of, okay, do we need leaders? I think we're told or convinced or tricked into believing that if we don't have somebody kind of forcing the order, it would be chaos. And I think that's the justification for government. That's the justification for why we need leaders and military and tanks and bombs and drones, because if not, somebody is going to do something bad and you need to, everybody has this instinct survival mechanism where it's kill to be killed. So I want to get into your theory on, so you have Darwin's theory, right? A lot of people just believe in natural selection. You have the religious perspective or a spiritual perspective, more of creation or a creator. And then you have a third theory, right? One that you think could be maybe slightly different or maybe a hybrid theory.
When I went to the Santa Fe Institute, the second thing that I started working on was the question. I'm going to back up a little bit and say, so I started out as a literary theorist studying literature, and I'm a novelist primarily. But I was interested in, at the time after postmodernism, it was said, and people still say this sort of thing, is that human beings don't have any free will. At one time, they said that you're totally determined by your cultural view, your economic identity, and so forth, and that whatever you say, you're just your class identity is speaking through you. And then there's genetic determinism, where whatever you do and say is basically determined by your genes. And somebody like Yuval Noah Harari will say that kind of thing. Totally mechanistic, deterministic. And as a creative writer, I felt that was not true. And I would look at the language and try to discover what evidence is that this is an original thought with this particular writer. And so I became interested in that idea of stories having purpose to them and their own, through the art. You can create new ideas through art that didn't exist before and that you didn't just inherit from your culture and so forth. And skip ahead a little bit. Now I'm at the Santa Fe Institute studying that in terms of evolution evolutionary theory, self-organization, scientific theories. And yeah, so that's how I got into studying science. And I wanted to find a way to find those processes in nature that you couldn't just attribute to genes or to chemistry. And so now, 20 years later, I work in a field called biosemiotics. And it's true that all living systems, even at the lowest level, use signs. They use signs in the world to stand for other things. And so everything that's alive interprets, has the power of interpreting things. And sometimes you can interpret wrong or based on your biases or your anticipation or so forth. And so there's a level at which any living organism isn't just the product of physics or chemistry, because they learn to interpret things and they construct their environment out of their interpretations. And that's a distinction between matter and living things that is ignored by the transhumanists, by the determinists, and so forth. So that's where I am in this kind of, and I'm not in this stage where I think that there is a creator necessarily. I think that there's creation, and I think that there's goodness. And I've arrived at like a Spinozan or Einstein's God or something like that, or where you see, or maybe the New England transcendentalists, where you see evidence of goodness and complexity in nature itself, in the workings of nature. So that's what a lot of scientists end up, where they end up when they give up their models of religion that they grew up with, and they still have this longing to, it's more than a longing, it's more like a sense that there is purpose in the world and that you do have free will. And there are things that are truly good and truly wrong.
Yeah, I had Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell from the telepathy tapes on not too long ago, and she's been researching savant syndrome and these nonverbal autistic kids and how they're communicating with their parents and teachers that felt like they're communicating with these non-autistic verbal kids. And I remember her telling her story of how she got into science and all the things that she was intrigued with. And she talked about and I'm going to get this quote wrong, but it was something along the lines that she was talking to another scientist, and she's like, how can you study science and be religious? And then the scientist goes, how can you study science and not be religious or spiritual? And this idea of like, when you look into science, there's so many, you used the word fringe. It reminds me of Rupert Sheldrake when he was on years ago, because I remember doing.
You had Rupert Sheldrake on?
Yeah, many years ago. Yeah. This is when he was a lot more fringe. When I had him on, I did talk about morphic resonance and whatnot. You do your research on him, and I was familiar with his work, but I remember just Googling some stuff and just looking over some of his work, and I would constantly find the word fringe. And now you look at what he talked about and stuff that he's laughed at by a lot of mainstream scientists, and people are looking at it completely different. And in the telepathy tapes, he was a huge influence of that whole podcast and all that research. And I think we're discovering that there is a lot more than we understand, and there's all these layers to reality and maybe even our origin story.
So yeah, those patterns, the patterns in nature those are self-organizing patterns that spontaneously emerge when you apply. He does the water, and you apply a regular movement, and there's feedback, and you get these patterns in the water. And those patterns also, he points out, look very much certain animal patterns and look like certain body plans when an organism is developing morphogenesis. So another part of my story is when I went to SFI, one of the things that I was studying was Vladimir Nabokov's theory of insect mimicry. And I had to look at what was the probability that a butterfly wing pattern could develop this way and not that way. And it turns out that those kind of fields with the feedback, it's reaction diffusion processes, is what determines the butterfly wing patterns. And I was introduced to Alan Turing's work. In the last years of his life, he was working on organic patterns, spontaneous patterns that you find throughout nature. And not because he had changed his interest, he was still wondering how the brain organizes itself. Study of butterfly wing patterns, I started to learn about how the brain organizes itself. And that has been very helpful now in my work critiquing those who think that they can read the mind or put Neuralink in to control thoughts or whatever. I understand a little bit about these reaction diffusion processes and how they organize the brain waves. And it makes me, when I look at the equipment that they're trying to use in order to read brains, I say, it's so simplistic and primitive compared to what is actually going on in the brain. To some extent, these are mathematical equations that you can use to make models of these kinds of patterns like Rupert is making. But that doesn't mean that you can control them in the way that, just knowing how some of those algorithms might mimic the types of patterns that you see doesn't mean that you can control them. And I think I want to say too, because Epstein was talking about Santa Fe Institute a lot in that interview he had with Steve Bannon. And, and I'm going, no. I knew, I had heard that he had funded some of the things, and Murray Gell-Mann distanced himself from it in the 90s when it was discovered, all the things that Epstein was involved in. But Epstein was throwing money everywhere. Anyone that seemed like they were investigating new territory, he was interested in that, because they're so obsessed in breaking the genetic code, understanding how the mind works, all these kinds of mad scientist proposals where they could control everybody, understand the economy, and that they're egomaniacs and they want to use science to gain more power. And so, of course, they're going to go to Santa Fe Institute because they were doing very new kind of research there and making discoveries about deterministic chaos, self-organization, complex system science. Of course, he would throw some money there. But apparently, I read from Courtney's work that he only gave $275,000, which is nothing. They didn't have much money to begin with, but they didn't need a lot of money. They just needed a campus. They didn't use a lot of expensive equipment. They were mostly mathematicians and philosophers. But yeah, so he probably didn't have, just for comparison, when I was there, the group that I was in, it was just 2 or 3 people, got a $2 million grant from DARPA. $275,000 isn't going to buy you much.
Yeah, Hitler was also very intrigued with eugenics, cultism. It seems like he might have been influenced by similar things in regards to just wanting to understand, like you said, like these, how to control people, I guess, is probably the end game of it. But there also seems to be a true curiosity of reality and nature and science and,
Which
something.
is a good thing, the interest in how things work.
Yeah, it is, but because not when they do it, and then they're doing it for other reasons and
for their purposes.
And like recently, Rogan just had Roger Avery on. He was a part of Pulp Fiction and a bunch of really big movies, but he's been in Hollywood producer for a long time, or director, I don't know, one of the two. But he was talking about, there's a little clip that's circulating right now about him talking about how he does think that all these artists in California, there's like satanic rituals going on, the eyes wide shut type of thing of these secret societies doing these. And it's okay, is that all intertwined? Is there a link between all these things where it's like you're trying to tap into something, right? And there's always been these discussions of suppressed knowledge. If it's the Freemasons, if it's Skull and Bones, if whoever it is, Bohemian Grove, like they think they're tapping into something. And when you like look at our understanding of reality and how like it's evolving and we're becoming much more open-minded to this idea that we could be much more limited by our senses than we initially thought, then maybe they were on to something. It's also intriguing because it's like it's either rich, crazy, powerful people doing just rich, crazy, powerful people things like these blood sacrifices or whatever, or they really are tapping into something. They know something that we don't know, and they're suppressing information to keep us materialistic, just machines, just feeding the machine.
I guess then, so I haven't really looked at the telepathy tapes, and I don't know whether I agree with Rupert Sheldrake's idea of every one of us has a resonance that communicates something to somebody else. I can understand that we would have some sort of electromagnetic field, maybe. Couldn't be very powerful, but certainly we can test that. And then if you were close to somebody else, maybe the fields would have some sort of interference with each other because they're fields. But would that be something that we could pick up with our brains? I don't know. Maybe there would be some way that you could test that, I would think. That would be my hypothesis. So I'm given this odd situation where there's anomaly, something that I don't expect. That there's an autistic child that seems to be able to communicate with his parents when the parent's not in the room or so forth. So let me provide some sort of hypothesis that I can then test.
Well, they did test it. That's what made the telepathy tape so interesting, was that they would have parents look at a number, a color, whatever it may be, and children a certain distance away would see that color or number and would know what they're looking at. And then there was a thing called the hill. I think that's what it was
And
called.
how many times what was the accuracy in the guessing?
It was pretty high. I can't remember the exact number, but it was incredibly high. And there's also this thing called the hill, which was fascinating because all these kids were basically meeting at this place that they would call the hill. And they thought it was something in their imagination, something that didn't really exist. And then a child met up with another child that was meeting at the hill, and they knew all about each other without ever meeting. So you hear these things, and it's not to say that we know what's going on or whatnot, or some of these things can't be explained, but it does open the door to, okay, what's going on here? And the mouse experiment with Rupert Sheldrake is fascinating. This idea that they would see these mice learn this maze slightly quicker at a different location, never exposed to those other mice or exposed to that maze before, almost like we're all like sharing some type of consciousness or whatnot. And then you have the experiments with the dogs or the pets where they would know when the owner's coming home, and then they would change the time the owner would come home, or they would change the vehicle that they would drive home. So there's no indications of when they were coming home or what they were driving. And they seem to have some type of, they would just have some energy, some signal that they would pick up on that would let them know that they're nearby. And really there's a lot of just personal experiences when you think of just that feeling of being watched, right? Or that sense of you're near somebody, you're like, I don't get good vibes from this person, or I do get good vibes from that person. We don't know what that is. And I forget the name.
I think good vibes are things that we can probably pick up through a lot of things. There's probably a lot of sense of smell that we don't realize that we are understanding at a subconscious level that we don't consciously smell. I'm very interested in coincidences that seem to, so this is what turned out to be my dissertation. It's called The Biologist, Mistress. And I'll explain that title, but look at the artwork on there. That's a tree that's bare of leaves that has a cloud that just happens to be in the same formation of the tree, of the branches. Coincidences like that really do get our imagination, and throughout history have been proof of some sort of supernatural. And they are the most important thing to me in art, that when an artist notices some sort of coincidence or can bring two things together and make some sort of new meaning out of it, that's extremely important. And this is also what I'm doing in my field of biosemiotics too, is that every living system can read into coincidences like that in the material world and then interpret that and make something new. And so I do think coincidences are extremely important and are the source of radical novelty in the world. and the source of new creativity. So I don't want to say that I dismiss them at all. I'm completely obsessed with them. Most important thing in the world to me is when you have these coincidences come together, and then some thinking thing, a living system interprets it. But I would have to look at those experiments. I started to listen to some of them, and I said I would have to have the experiments replicated in various situations to see whether or not you can replicate that experiment in a different situation to make sure that the findings were legitimate and that they weren't fudged in some way. Not to say that people would lie or whatever, but sometimes they want to see that the child picked up the same number, and it may have been close, but not quite. And there are ways of...
They have videos of it. You could actually see videos of them doing it live, where like they'll point at a number, or a parent will be looking at a number, hold up a number, whatever, and then the kid across the room facing in the opposite direction will point at the same number that they picked up. And it, again, not to say that obviously I'm not in the room, I don't know if magic obviously looks real too, right? If you don't know how they do the trick, it looks real. Not to say that it can't be some fuckery, for lack of a better term, but it does seem to be. And really, one of the reasons why I entertain this idea is because there was also a documentary called Speller, right? Are you familiar with that documentary? Yeah, where they looked at nonverbal autistic kids slightly different than they have in the past, where previously, for people who are listening and might not be familiar with the documentary, they thought it was a cognitive issue. And then there seemed to be like some type of breakthrough where they looked at it differently, where they said, okay, maybe you're stuck in there. There is a cognitive human being in there who has thoughts and more complex.
It's a motor skills problem that they can't communicate. They can't control their bodies enough to communicate their ideas, but they have been listening to language this entire time, and they've been completely aware. And when they're asked a question, do you want chicken or beef? They make these noises and they can't express what they actually want because they don't have the motor control. And so the Spellers is a way of, they start with really wide motor control and they learn slowly to be a little bit more in control so that they can point at letters. I have several friends who have severely autistic, nonverbal autistic kids. They don't report any kind of telepathy. They seem very intuitive and sensitive, but they don't report telepathy, which made me doubt the telepathy tapes. Charles Eisenstein told me that I should look at it, and I plan to. I'm open to it. I'm open to understanding what it is. I think if it's true, then there's an explanation for it that's not magic. There's a reason why. Maybe it has something to do with electromagnetic fields. Could be. That's kind of signals that travel over distances, and not, after all, we have radio waves that are picked up. I don't know. I would be interested in researching that, but I'm a little bit afraid of the idea and the fear that these psychopaths that are eating children apparently have, for us to think that they might be in possession of some supernatural powers is something that I want to stay away from, because I don't want us to be fearful of these people. But fear will make us make mistakes and make us do irrational things, perhaps. Look what happened to everybody with the COVID lockdown. I would rather make fun of these people. I would rather criticize them and their stupid rituals that they're doing, these bogus things. Could make fun of them if I knew that they weren't actually doing horrific things. I tell you, I'm a conspiracy theorist. I wrote a 9/11 conspiracy theory novel. I've got a COVID conspiracy novel. I've been in this business since 2010 or so, but I never went for the satanic ritual stuff. The baby sacrifice and things like that. It's just, there are a lot of people, you just don't want to imagine that people can do that sort of thing. It's just very hard for us to think that's possible, but I guess it is. I guess it's going on.
Yeah, and apparently some of it works because me and Bondi was when she was on TV doing the Epstein thing. I was like, I'm like, I feel like she's been around forever. Let me look how old she is. She's 60. I cannot believe she's 60. She's definitely drinking toddler blood or something because I'm like, how is she 60? I'm like, she looks amazing, even though she's a horrible person. But it is fascinating. I think a part of it, and I think it was one of the struggles during COVID and why I think since I've been into conspiratorial rabbit holes, which has probably been as long as you, I started in 2013. And I started in 2013. I was already a long time conspiracy theorist in my group of friends. I was the one who got laughed at for bringing up some of these scandals and bringing up some of these theories. And they would never entertain them in a serious light. We'd be out to eat, a couple of friends, and they're like, Rick, what do you think about Hitler? Is he still alive? Or what do you think of 9/11? What do you think of this or that? And they were intrigued with some of alternative views on some of these things, but it was just entertainment to them. And I think that was easier for them to discuss then than it is now, where it's okay, now ignorance is bliss. Maybe it's scary for some people to believe that evil does exist. And I think that's the part that people struggle with, is the idea that people can purposely harm others and not have any remorse about it. And I think when you're a decent person, you struggle to understand that because it's so beyond anything you could ever do that you just have a hard time believing it exists. And I think that is one of the problems with a lot of these things, because it's always, okay, this story is going to be the story that red pills everybody. And everybody's just going to wake up to the fact that the world is not, it doesn't work the way they think it works. That 9/11, maybe they could have inside information. Maybe they were even a part of it, the US government. And all those people whose lives were lost or ruined, or people who got sick, or the first responders who were breathing in air that they said was safe to breathe, and maybe they all knew that was going to happen. And then to come to that conclusion is difficult. And I see it throughout my life, because as people get emotionally further from a story and situation, it becomes easier to discuss. And then when you reflect on what made it so difficult at the moment, it was because they're emotionally involved. So 9/11, for example, the closer I go back in my life talking about 9/11 to the events of 9/11, it was harder to have a logical discussion about the things that didn't make sense about the events. And people would get really worked up and upset. Today, we're emotionally more detached from the events. It's easier for people to look at it from a logical perspective. Same thing, I think, with COVID.
People have begun, the population at large has lost more and more trust in the government, because it's just absolutely ridiculous, right? The people that have been on the main stage. So I realized that people are not going to wake up. In the beginning, we probably thought, oh, wow, as soon as everybody finds out about 9/11, they'll be up in arms, and I thought my novel, this is Locus Amoenus. It's about Hamlet as a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. So his father was killed on 9/11, and 7 years later, his mother remarries, and he's really depressed about that. And she marries somebody who's worked on the NIST report. And then Horatio comes later with a bag of the dust, and he's analyzed it, and he tells Hamlet that your new stepfather is a fraud, and that this is what happened to your father on 9/11. And so his worldview, like the original Hamlet, is turned upside down, and he's struggling to come to terms with all that and confront his mother and confront his new stepfather and find out the truth. And everyone in the town laughs at him. And he's shocked, because you think that, oh, look at this evidence. It's material evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that there were incendiaries planted in the towers. And it doesn't happen. And we go on, and it'll be 25 years this September. Nothing changes. Is that going to happen with the Epstein files too? What we went through with COVID, nothing changes. I think people have woken up about the idea. A lot of people realize that they were misled about all the precautions that needed to be done. And they probably realized that they shouldn't have taken those vaccines. That was irresponsible to do that. It's an experimental thing. Don't do that. but they don't want to admit that they were so terrified, they reacted out of fear, and they're slightly embarrassed that they did that to themselves and to their children and to their employees and everything. Will this be the thing? Will this finally be the thing that wakes people up? The revelation that people in power kill babies.
I don't think it will. I think it's almost so crazy for people. They just don't. It's like eyes wide shut. People just look at it like it's entertainment. But then when you look at like Kubrick's mysterious death, all the mystery behind the film, and what some people said was it exposed how sick and weird Hollywood is and the world, those secret societies and whatnot, that it's just easier to believe that people on TV are normal like us, and that the persona and the perspective that they're painting for us to consume that's them. That's organically them. So when you hear about people that you like and people that, nobody wants to hear that Woody Allen is a monster. Nobody wants to hear that. Look at Bill Cosby, right? That was a kind of a silly example, but a lot of people who grew up watching that show saw him as the most innocent guy you could think of. So the fact that he could do anything wrong. Look at Michael Jackson, right? And I don't know what to believe with Michael Jackson, but people who love his music, their first instinct will be to resist that he could have done anything harmful. Now, this leads into all these, I think these industries and these elites are all intertwined. I think the music industry is no different. They obviously, without the artists, they don't exist, but yet they rape the artists of all the revenue and money and leave them broke. There's a great documentary called Artifact about the story of 30 Seconds of Mars, which was Jared Leto's band. And I remember seeing them when they first came out, because they opened up for another band I liked, and he never used his celebrity to promote the band, but the band eventually got very big. And in this documentary Artifact, he's talking about selling out stadiums and how they're still like in the negative because the record label has charged them for inflated charges for everything, and that they're literally like losing money. And these are the systems that we live in and so, I mean, I guess this leads into something else that we've hit on a little bit, but is this fixable? Is it inherent? Is there obviously throughout history, and I've said this over and over again on the show, like there's always been people who want to control people. Is that, nurture, nature? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, we can fix it. And we started to talk about this with the Santa Fe Institute associated group Game B, trying to come up with a decentralized form of governance that would be more equitable. Yes, you can do it. You have to remove the levers of power. And that's the problem. Our system grants quite a bit of power to individuals who, once they get that power, they get more for themselves and more for themselves and more for themselves. And we're at the point where the president can make an executive order and all this, throw the Constitution out the window, make an executive order, and all of a sudden his voice is law. That's never what was intended. And it just creeped in little by little. Teddy Roosevelt was one of the first to, I think maybe the first with executive orders. He declared areas national parks through executive orders. That's nice and everything, but it shouldn't have been done that way. It should have been done through Congress. So yeah, there are ways to fix the system. You remove power. And as far as an artist like Michael Jackson, he is an absolutely fantastic, wonderful dancer, incredible performer. I loved him so much when I was young. And my latest book, which is called The Girly Playhouse, which is about female dancing and feminine sexuality, was really inspired a lot by his energy, that you could see there was something wrong. There was something that he was holding him back. He was frustrated. He was angry at something. He was fighting the world. There was so much energy there. And then when you hear about his life, he was abused. He was abused. I don't know if he turned around and abused children after that, but a lot of them do. And that's the reason why this pedophilia and child abuse goes on, is because the victims usually become victimizers. And
hurt people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sad. I've had conversations with people when talking about the Franklin scandal, or talking about any of these child trafficking stories. not to sympathize with them, but in a way, I guess it is sympathizing with, where it's, I know so many of these stories, when you look into it, the victim or the criminal was the victim at one point. And it's like, how do you break the cycle? And it's okay, they're still obviously responsible for what they've done, but in a way you can understand, okay, you never had a fair shot because you've been victimized, you've been traumatized, you've been scarred and damaged, and now you're a broken human being, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. But so it is scary. I live in Massachusetts, and there was a story that I think it made national news, about these guys who like broke into a house and raped a family and then burned down the house or whatever. And then the guy, the mastermind behind all this, there was like I don't know if it was a documentary or a movie based on him, but they went into his childhood, and he was like super religious family, and his the family priest was like molesting him and told him that, but his parents were always telling him that sex was bad and this and that. So one day, like, the mother walked in to the bathroom, and like he was trying to like cut off his private part because he thought that he did something wrong because he was touched there. And it's okay, like, how do you not sympathize with the guy who did this horrible act of going into a house and raping people and burning down the house and killing his family? It's like, yeah, he's an awful human being, but it's hard. It is. It's like I'm having the internal dilemma as I share it out loud, because it is a weird thing. Because in a way, it's like you sympathize with him, but he's a monster. So you're sympathizing with a monster.
Let me bring up Vladimir Nabokov, who wrote Lolita, and Epstein famously his airplane was called the Lolita Express, and the island was named after Lolita. And so it's awkward for me, for people who have never read the book Lolita and have never understood that Nabokov was writing about a criminal who stole a little girl's childhood, and the child dies young. And the thing about what literature can help you do when it's written from the point of view of somebody else, you get inside the mind of the narrator. And it teaches you some empathy, not necessarily, you don't sympathize with the character, that you don't approve of their notion, but you do live their experiences. And so you can just learn how to step outside your own perspective, as you did when you're imagining that child had an abusive childhood. And so it acts as an explanation, not a justification of the later life. But it's good for us as humans to be able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. Even if that person is a criminal, even if that person has done something terrible, so that you can understand it better. And Nabokov's book has been very important in recent years in France for women who were sexually abused. In France, for a very long time, it was considered okay for a 14-year-old to have a relationship with an older man, particularly if he was wealthy and so forth. And so that there was a lot of young women who were victimized by that cultural view. And getting their hands on Lolita and reading Nabokov, they understood what had happened to them. And they learned how to forgive themselves for being misled and being manipulated into that situation. Although Nabokov always said that he wasn't interested in teaching a lesson with his work. He always claimed that he was an artist and he merely created stylistic presentations or whatever. But there's a heavy moralistic tale in that book. He shows how manipulative people can be and how charming people can be. And the important thing with reading this kind of thing too is the level of irony that you get in a work that's not literal. You are meant to interpret everything that narrator says as if, oh, this guy is a pervert. He's trying to defend himself. He's trying to make excuses. He's trying to paint his picture of what he's done in a way to convince the jury not to condemn him. But you as a reader go, oh, I see the manipulation here. And you learn how to read into things. And learning to read in this way is very important because so much of what we get today as news and information is propaganda. And you have to be able to go, okay, they're saying this at a literal level, but what are they doing? They're bringing these two things together. They're trying to make these associations. They're bringing in these metaphors to manipulate me into feeling this way. They're trying to get my emotions. And so I think that's been a problem with society for the last several decades is they're not reading this kind of literature that is requiring you to do interpretation and just to not take things at face value and say, okay, they're literally saying this, but what does that mean? What's the subtext of that? And we've lost that ability to be skeptical readers and critical thinkers. There's more of a tendency for people we need to read nonfiction, we need to learn logic, we need to be more precise and clear. In that way, we can understand all this conspiracy theory stuff. Let's give everybody a bunch of facts. People need to learn how to interpret. I think people would be better off reading more poetry. They would be more self-aware. They would develop more critical thinking skills than if they're taught just logic. Because our minds work that way. When we derive an opinion about something, it's because of all the associations that we bring with it. We often make up our minds subconsciously, not with logic, but just with feelings. And so I think we need a lot more practice as artists. And because we're irrational animals, a lot of times we can reflect and be logical afterwards, but basically we're irrational.
Yeah, even the most logical people, they might not even realize it, but there's emotions that are going into their decision making and whatnot. Empathy is important. And a lot of those people at the higher ups, I think they either are born without it, they're conditioned to remove it or detach from it. There's something because
traumatized, disassociated. But our system does absolutely select for psychopaths. And once you get psychopaths in there, then you get the worst kind of psychopath, which apparently we have some of those. And I hope this gets people to say, okay, we need to make major changes in our system. No small reforms. Absolutely. Major changes. We can't really even have representatives making new laws all the time. We don't need new laws. They write all these bills that supposedly are going to help fix this or fix that. And as they've accreted over the years, we just have fewer and fewer freedoms. They have more and more control. Every time they come out with a new project or a new program that's going to benefit the people, a new scheme for education, they just get worse and worse. And we just need to peel all that back.
So you don't think that politics is so... It's weird because I feel like society can go in two different directions right now. Either you can have the optimistic view of people are waking up and then it's going to force the system to have to change. And hopefully people will rethink what type of system we have to have. Because I think a lot of what's worked historically has been convincing the public, hey, we can make changes to the system, but they have to be slight changes because this is the system that works. This is the way things are, and this is the way things have been, and this is the way things have to be. Anybody who's drastically different is just a crazy person. But I've always been intrigued with looking at our system, how we trade things, what we consider valuable, rethinking all this. I remember back in the day, do you remember the Venus Project? You remember the Zeitgeist movies?
The Zeitgeist movies?
Yeah.
Yes, I did see some of them, yeah.
Yeah, the third one. So the first one was conspiratorial about the idea of using propaganda to control people. I think it even goes into manufacturing consent and Noam Chomsky, by the way, who was also hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein, weirdly enough. And then they go into the second one, addendum was about the banking system and how that was all kind of a scam and how the Federal Reserve and banks just make money out of nowhere and how they control things and control the currency. And then the third one was about, it was called Moving Forward, and it was about the Venus Project, which I forget what his name was called. He passed away some years ago, sometime after the movie, but it was about just rethinking the way society works and like this idea of we'll have enough technology and resources where people don't have to struggle to eat and survive and pay their bills. And there's no need to have this type of system that we have now. And maybe we can reinvent things. But it hints on the topic of what the World Economic Forum talks about and this idea of owning nothing and being happy, this idea of us just sharing. I guess in theory, in a fantasy world, if I could imagine a world where we all just share resources, it sounds crazy, but we do it already now, right? If I get a taxi, if I live in New York, I don't have to own a car. I can just borrow that taxi, pay a fee, and then borrow it. I go to the gym. I don't have to own any of the equipment. We all share it. We go in. We all politely wipe it off. We all politely put our weights away and work in harmony without.
Yeah, people are basically good.
Yeah, yeah. So that's
People are basically good. I don't know. I was just at the People's Reset in Mexico, which is this idea of these intentional communities where they all go out. There's some of them here in the United States, Freedom Cells. And I think any idea of community is basically that thing. You pool your resources. Look at what the Amish do. They all pitch in and they put up a barn or so forth. And so the idea of community is that you pitch in. Let me go back to something that you said earlier and that I wanted to comment on about the idea that AI could come up with this sort of neutral algorithm that would be better than these corrupt people. And I give it running the thing. And I think that's where they're trying to push us. And I think that's why they let this Epstein files come out the way that they have. Oh, what are we going to do? We're going to just have to switch to AI. AI is bureaucracy on steroids. AI will be some sort of algorithmic thinking that you invent the best way to do something and then you implement that down the line. And that is absolutely the opposite of complex system thinking and decentralization of power, where you allow people to self-organize. They make their decisions on the ground, and then it filters up a little bit. And then there's pressure from the constraints that are created. And that is the way that's the free market idea. But the free market idea has some limits because the free market can't be applied in every situation. It doesn't work in art. It doesn't work in education. It doesn't work in government. It doesn't work in charity. It works for things like if you make shoes, then you can compete with the other guy that makes shoes too. And you go after separate niches or something like that. If you're making some sort of product, then yeah, free market competition can lead to good things. But bureaucracy is terrible, right? Those ridiculous laws that you have to follow if you've ever had to file something at your town. And in our case, on our farm, we usually want to do something that's better for the environment than their standards require. We want to do something innovative. And we're not allowed to do it because they have certain things that, so improving the system is impossible when you have too many regulations and this bureaucracy. And algorithms, AI, they're just going to make decisions about what they think is good. I worked as a consultant for this company that was trying to make AI aligned with human values. And I have to ask, what are human values? I don't think we've decided that. And we certainly haven't set them down in a way we got the 10 Commandments. Let's see, thou shalt not kill. And then some situations where if you do kill somebody, maybe there was a reason, maybe you were being abused or something and you were fighting back or whatever. That's why we have the court systems that we have, where you explain the whole thing that happened. The jury listens to you and you determine whether or not you're guilty of said crime. And then what is the punishment for that? That's not algorithmic at all, our current court system, if it were functioning properly. We have basic laws that are set on precedents. What have people decided in the past? We'll go by that tradition. It's a common law tradition. But each case is handled individually in a just society. And you hear, so no, we're not going to get an algorithm. The smaller the government, the more people are involved in decision making. Like you have a cooperative that's making the decisions about the local internet company and internet connection. And you have a local board that's interested in the farming regulations, and the people who are involved in farming come together and everybody contributes to that. Those are the kinds of things that you need to break up the decision making to the people on the ground who are going to have to live with those decisions financially and in terms of the product and conforming to the regulations. That's what we need to do, is just push the decision making to the bottom, to the local communities, have the government issue greenbacks like Lincoln did during the Civil War, and also what Benjamin Franklin did during the colonial period with the colonial script. Those two forms of money led to wealth in the country. Of course, we need to get rid of the fractional reserve banking system. We allow the psychopaths in the world to create money, and we have to get mortgages through them and pay them interest. That's absolutely crazy. That needs to stop yesterday. Yeah, there are things that we can do to change this. And I don't think we have to get everybody on board with changing, or everybody has to be woken up, but just a significant number. And I think we're getting close to that tipping point at this today, now, at this time, with these Epstein files. I don't know. I think maybe local sheriffs need to go to Washington, D.C. and start arresting people. That might be.
Yeah, that would help a little bit. It is intriguing because that does make a lot of sense, the idea of releasing, because I'm curious, you can go on, I don't know if you've been on there, but email.world, and you can go through a bunch of emails, and you can go through, it looks like the Gmail account of Epstein, you can go through his photos and all this stuff. And I'm just like, why would they put all this stuff out there? Obviously, a lot of it has been destroyed. There's no doubt. The stuff that you haven't seen is way worse than the stuff you have seen. They've been scraping this for a while, and it is pretty crazy, the stuff they even let come out, but I'm sure it barely scratches the surface. But it does make sense, the idea of maybe you do it, you have this slow change in the perspective of the elites and politicians and whatnot, transitioning to the idea of, hey, we just can't be run by humans because they're all just crazy, for the purpose of justifying having some type of AI that will make the decisions for us. At the end of the day, like I keep saying, I still think there'll be humans behind it influencing the decisions it makes.
Oh, yeah. They'll just blame it on AI. Absolutely. They're not looking to give up any of their control whatsoever.
Oh, go ahead.
I think Palantir was responsible for the decision or the realization that it was time to bomb Iran because they were close to getting nuclear capable. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Oh, but that's what the AI told us. We put in all the data, and that was the best information we have. Time to bomb Iran. No, you wanted to bomb Iran. That's what happened. So it'll be for plausible deniability. We can blame it on the AI, but that's the only explanation that I can come up with of why they're allowing this to be released. But then again, they're confident because we found out a lot of things. You and I know a lot of this stuff. We're not surprised by it. We're surprised that it was released. We're surprised that they're talking about it in the mainstream media. That's what we're surprised about. And maybe they're just comfortable. Like, the people have put up with so much already. I think we can give them just a little bit more. They're used to doing this to children. How far can they abuse children and still get them to go along with stuff? They're abusing us now. They're abusing us, and maybe they think we're going to go along with it. Maybe we
Well,
will.
I think it's a slow conditioning of these things, right? It's like you slowly, it's like disclosure with the UAPs and all that stuff. A lot of people believe, oh, they're just slowly, just slow drip of these type of things. So then you just slowly accept it, right? Like your whole worldview doesn't just shatter overnight. You slowly start accepting it, and then you go back to your everyday life. And you're slowly dripping this information, and people are, their worldviews are slowly changing because it does seem, I don't know what your first conspiracy theories and rabbit holes were when you first started rethinking the world, but I remember trying to have discussions with people and I would throw way too much at them all at once. And they would look at me like I'm a crazy person. I'm like, oh, I need to tippy toe my way into these topics. I
Yeah.
can't. So is that possible? Is that predictive programming? Is it something like that?
There's definitely a lot of that going on in the boiling frogs. They slowly turn up the temperature and we don't learn to jump out. There's definitely a lot of that going on. But I do believe they are trying, and they have said that they are trying to take down the system, the current system, to build a new one, build back better, the Great Reset, all those things. It's about, they constantly talk about how everything's so bad, it needs to come to an end. So I think that's behind this release. And maybe Trump wasn't aware that he was going to be used in this way to be the one that is in office when Epstein's crimes and company are revealed. So maybe these presidents are just pawns. They're just puppets. I'm sure they thought it was a good idea to put Trump in office when they were going to do the COVID rollout. He was useful in so many ways, getting the people to be pitted against each other and to say no to the ivermectin and to all that craziness. And then it was useful for them to have Biden in when the vaccine rollout came and the lockdowns and the mandates, or not the lockdowns, but the mandates. So, yeah, the people in power, the banking industry, are taking down the system. They're
For
taking
the fourth industrial revolution, is that?
the fourth industrial revolution. Yeah. I don't think that they're running out of time and they're having to launch their plans sooner than expected. Then they're not quite ready. They thought that they would be ready at this time to convert to a new system of global governance. They're not quite ready. And anytime you take apart a system and you destroy civilization, basically how civilization is currently organized, as bad as it is, you're going to get chaos and they might not be able to control it. And I think it's our opportunity to talk seriously about what kind of monetary policy we're going to have. How are we going to create money and how are we going to get it into the system? What's the best way to do that? What are the roles of government? Should the government be involved in education? Or should the government just provide communication lines so that people can find their own information? Probably we need to start planning so that we are there to say, hey, throughout history, there were these good ideas that were tried by some people. President Lincoln, Benjamin Franklin, they had these ideas of monetary policy. They worked. There are reasons why Lincoln was killed that probably are related to the financial world more so than the Civil War. But yeah, they're taking it down. They're taking it down. This is part of the controlled demolition, is the Epstein files.
Yeah, and you've been to Russia. And speaking of philosophers, are you familiar with Alexander Dugin?
Dugin.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've had Michael Millerman on, Professor Michael Millerman, who was the first person to translate Dugin's work into English. He was a Canadian professor and then lost his job. And very fascinating story, very fascinating just person and podcaster and author and person. But him and others think that some of the pushback or some of the dislike of the Soviets, all the way back from the Soviets to Russia now, is a little bit of them getting in the way of the agenda because they are a primarily religious country that seems to push back against some of this more materialistic worldview. Do you think there's anything to that?
There are good and bad things about the Russian government that I see. They're very conservative and religious. Yes, that's part of it. So they wouldn't have endured any of the stuff with mutilating children. That is absolutely abhorrent to them. But there are plenty of the oligarchy, okay? And that when the wall fell, what they did was everybody owned a piece of the government electrical infrastructure. And so everybody got some stocks. Everybody was granted, you're part owner in this electrical company, you're part owner in this train system. But they were convinced to sell their stocks to the people who were in power in the party government, people who had acquired a little bit of wealth illegally, and they were funded by the United States, U.S. banks, to then buy up the Russian assets at fire sale prices. So you have all these, and I think that the fall of the Soviet Union was really a controlled demolition too. I don't think that was really an organic thing, because the CIA was there, the US was behind Yeltsin. I think they convinced the oligarchs there, that the people in power, that, hey, you could really make a lot of money with capitalism if you did. So you have a lot of people who are beholden to the West there, the oligarchs, the really super wealthy class, and they're totally locked into the Great Reset and the whole global governance, because they also want to use AI on their population too. And so to that extent, Russia is not an antidote to the Great Reset or to the kind of tyranny and authoritarianism that we're facing here. Russia is not that. I don't know about Putin. He seems to be very patriotic, and in a good and bad way. It believes in the power of the military to solve problems. And hence, I think he acted a little bit. I wish he hadn't have gone into Ukraine in the way that he did, maybe. But I understand from a military strategy that he did that. But yeah, the BRICS countries are not going to save us. They're not the balance of power between the Western empire. That's not going to save us. They do have, in Russia, there are a lot of 5-acre farms. Most of their potatoes and berries and carrots come from little tiny farms with a grandma doing a lot of the work. And they're resilient in that way. They're going to be okay. They're not as reliant upon imports and things like that as we are in America. And I think that kind of example, we should follow Russia's example in that. There should be 10% of the people in the United States should be farmers. I have a 5-acre farm, and I grow all of food for my people. I grow enough food for my family. We have just 3 people in my family, but we need a lot more of that. It's not that big of a mystery how to have a successful economy and civilization. You need a lot more self-sufficiency. And that is a key notion in complex system science and self-organization, is that every individual has to be busy making their little world a better place, and has to be able to survive when there are economic problems, shortfalls, changes in the economy, inflation, things like that. You've got to have your own security that you're responsible for, and that you're not relying on the government to send you UBI or whatever. Then you have a very resilient population that can weather any of these economic hard times.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like my parents, I was born in northern Portugal in Chaves. That was the closest city, but we're from like a little village nearby. And I always say, if shit hit the fan, like my parents would be fine. They would be completely fine. Everything they eat, they pick, grow, and kill. They raise animals. They have a very strong connection to Mother Nature and plants and animals. And my dad makes all the wine he can drink. So he has alcohol, he has food. They're good to go. And there is also a love for Mother Nature and a connection to Mother Nature that you get being a farmer and doing these things yourself, appreciation for it. growing up, I was always a bit confused when I was really little because I'm like, it seems like my parents like the animals that they're killing. And I'm like, I'd be like, I don't get it. Why are you killing them if you seem to enjoy feeding them and that you would get mad if a coyote or a fox or somebody got in there? I'm like, weren't you going to kill that animal anyways? What are you so mad about? And you realize that like they just understood there was a cycle of life, right? And they were just part of the cycle. And they would take the time to make sure the chickens were in at the end of the day. They would, all these little things that kind of made them appreciate the food a little bit more and also have this connection. And I think we are missing that. There is some of that we are missing. And obviously, I think it's on purpose. You look at, they want us stuck and going to the grocery store and not being independent and whatnot. And you know that story about the gangster gardener from California?
No,
He
but
wa-
that sounds
yeah, it's a catchy name, the gangster gardener. He lived in the projects, right? And you can't grow money, but you can grow food, which is like growing money because a lot of your money's going towards buying food. So if you're growing food, you're growing. So he didn't have any place to have a garden, but there was this little tree belt in front of the projects he lived at, and he's like, screw it, I'm just gonna grow some stuff here, and I'm gonna tell the people at the projects like, hey, you want anything, you can take whatever you want. But I'm going to use this piece of grass for a little garden. And he got in trouble because, of course, he couldn't do that. And then he ended up going to court and ended up becoming a big thing. And it was awesome because it ended up changing his life. He ended up doing a TED talk and writing a book, going on podcasts, and they call him the gangster gardener. And I think it was him who said it. And it seems like a simple solution to fix some of our hunger and homelessness, but he's like, hey, instead of planting all these trees that do nothing besides just and just they're basically just there for cosmetic reasons. Like, why not put like fruit trees everywhere? Why not so if a homeless person is really hungry, they can go there and grab it, and you can actually do something that benefits society instead of just something that doesn't. And I have a pear tree in my yard. Like I do nothing to it, and by the time all the pears fall off, my kids are sick of pears. They can't eat any more pears. They're like, I'm done with pears. I don't care that they're free and that they're delicious. They're like, I want an apple. I know it requires very little work. And it seems like it's by design because these solutions are there and it wouldn't be that hard to teach people how to do these things because that's another thing that's lax in our school system. It's like there's none of this.
But I disagree with that, though. I think it's the parents' job to teach the children how to do life. And you go to school to learn mathematics and reading and science and so forth. But
No,
yeah,
you're right.
that the parents need to teach the children how to cook and clean and grow food and all that. Yeah, agriculture, industrial agriculture and the new technologies, and we're going to have new technologies for growing food and taking care of people and stuff. That's a problem that doesn't need solving. Because human beings actually thrive when they have to get out there and grow their own food. That connection to nature, we are part of nature, and it feels good. It feels right. There is that problem with getting to know your animals and then asking them to dinner later. That's always I'm the one that makes the decisions about which rams and which ewes that we slaughter every year. And sometimes it's hard, but I know it's going to be quick. It's only a couple of minutes of the butcher comes out on the farm to slaughter them. So they're not put through any stress. And it's respect. If you're going to eat meat, respect your animals enough to treat them right and make sure that they're never put under any kind of stress. And I've seen what coyotes do to animals, and they would much rather be killed by the butcher than the coyotes that eat them alive, that rip their stomachs open and eat them alive. So yeah, after I saw that the coyotes coming in and killed 3 of my little lambs, I thought, oh, I don't feel bad now because that's how their nature is red in tooth and claw.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you're right, like the parents should be teaching those things. But unfortunately, speaking of systems, we've created a system where you need 2 parents to make enough money to be broke and the public. So when the parents.
That's one of the problems with the idea that one aspect of feminism was women need to earn money. Now they have to earn money. Maybe men shouldn't have even been put through that. You need to go outside the home and make money because it used to be that the man and the woman stayed at home and made their living at home. They grew their own food, and most people grew their own food, and maybe one of them had some sort of skill or was an artisan at some point. But then this idea that you go off and you work for somebody else is a relatively new idea. And I don't think it's been good for men, and I don't think it's good for women either, to have to be employed by a big company. Of course, that's capitalism, but there's some real disadvantages to that. And we probably would be better if women or one person in the family didn't work and stayed home. Then you could do your gardening, you could take care of the house, you can learn the basic skills for taking care of a home. You'd learn how to cook better, you'd have healthier meals, you'd be able to educate your own children, because you can now, because basically everybody has a library in their home, access to all the information, great documentaries, wonderful videos. We don't really need public schools anymore. That came at a time when the parents maybe didn't know how to read or write, and there would be one school teacher that came in and taught all the kids. We're not there anymore. And we probably don't need public education. What perhaps we need is continuing education for everybody. Maybe community centers where everybody goes to meet and talk, learn new skills, watch documentaries together. Maybe people of all ages could learn more about chemistry or biology or something like that. But we don't really need public schools anymore. They just warehouse the kids, and they teach them to shut up and listen and regurgitate things. And pretty soon they can just get ChatGPT to regurgitate it for them, because if that's all that's expected is just to regurgitate, then the computers are doing it now.
Yeah, I have a teacher friend of mine who said something, this was years ago, but it's still relevant now. He's like, if we're going to get to a point, he's like, why teach kids anything they can look up? And I'm like, you're right. Like, it's more about them understanding why the information is important, or maybe relating it to
How to use it.
Yeah, how to use it exactly, and not so much just regurgitation, which is by design, in my personal opinion. I always say it, my wife doesn't like me saying it in front of the kids, but school got in the way of my learning. I feel like school is not the only place you learn. You're learning from your hobbies, you're learning from, like you said, the documentaries, the art that you create or enjoy, whatever it may be. Anything that's thought-provoking is helping with your learning. So it's, to me, yeah, this idea of, that's why I'm so against homework. I'm not just saying it because I didn't ever do it when I was in school, but I'm saying it because, hey, you get my kids for 6 hours a day. By the time they get home, they eat or whatever.
They're exhausted.
I'm like, they're exhausted. And then it's my kids play sports or whatever. It's like they have very little free time, because bored kids get in trouble, not busy kids. So I like to keep my kids busy. And I like them in communities where, like, they have their basketball friends, their soccer friends, they got their school friends, they got this friend. So they have all these communities, they have tons of friends, and they always have something to look forward to and enjoy. And this goes into a topic that hopefully we didn't run out of time to talk about, but just fulfillment and purpose. I know it's a topic you're very passionate about. And but it gives them like something to look forward to, some fulfillment and purpose. And so it's okay, now you want that little bit of free time that they have to now also be dedicated to schoolwork, stuff that you had them 6 hours a day to.
And it's often busy work. It's often busy work. You asked me what had got me into conspiracy theory. The first thing was my son was in second grade here in the local school, and I was on the wellness committee, and we were going to have healthier lunches in the school because they were eating crap. And it seems to me that the schools should set a good example and not push bad food on them. So that was my first introduction. And I found out that there were all these federal guidelines that they had to follow that made the kids take a milk product and a bread product and a fruit product. Otherwise, they didn't get their subsidy back. So they sugared the milk. They served pizza every day as an option. And so that was the thing that woke me up a little bit as a libertarian too, because, it's the federal regulations that are actually arbitrarily causing very unhealthy food. And you're getting subsidies. I don't know if you know about the corruption between the USDA and everything. That just, if you took all of that away, I live in a farming community, just buy some food from and then cook it and serve it. But so that was my first introduction. And that's part of what I wrote about with my Hamlet in Locus Aminus. He's going to school and he's confronted. His mother's on the school board and is trying to get this. And he finally just leaves school because he doesn't have time to do any research in history or watch any documentaries or read a book or do any of the things where he could get real learning. And so it just became, why would I go to school to do all this busy work and get bad food and I'll just stay home and read a book. And I did that with my son and he turned out okay. I took him out and homeschooled him. And now he's finishing up a engineering degree and he's interning at NASA. So he did okay.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's there. I get it. There's like there's some benefits, I guess, in going to public school, but the problem is what happens with public schooling is that a lot of parents assume the public school is doing all the things that they should be doing. And that's like molding their worldviews and answering the big questions. And I remember going to school board meetings during COVID and I was exposed to some of the stuff that was going on locally in our schools because I would have concerned parents come up to me and they're like, oh, you wait till you hear about this story or that story or what this teacher, the ideas that was being pushed on this child or whatever. And my kids at the time were really small. So they weren't in middle school yet. They weren't in high school yet. So where a lot of these issues were going on. So I was just stunned. And I'm like, wait, this is happening even in our little town? This is,
Yeah. So the good things about public school are community. Any kind of community, people come together and do things that there are definitely some positive things with that. There are some good teachers. Every child benefits from somebody who is excited about their history or art or something and shares some of that enthusiasm with them. But the system just takes all the life out of that. And the school unions and things like that, whenever you get the power from on high, constraining everybody and everybody's got the same curriculum and everybody has to do the same standardized testings and stuff. You don't have human beings interacting anymore. And
that leads into probably the last topic I'll bother you for, but fulfillment in purpose. And I know it's a topic that you've written about and you're intrigued with and whatnot. I had a Hunter Motz on years ago. He wrote the book, The Straight A Conspiracy. And we would talk about how the school system a lot of times will just strip away creativity and imagination and a lot of these things because you're just regurgitating information. And then, so you reimagine society without a public school system that does that, where you actually provoke or reward people who are creative and use imagination. Because the capitalistic world view is you need money as a motivator.
You wouldn't need to reward them. They are just naturally creative and it's its own reward.
Exactly.
You don't need the carrot and stick.
That's always the point that I make, because if you look I've talked to a lot of artists on the show. Just a lot of people that I'm intrigued with, like Nikolai Tesla, whoever it is, whatever historic figure you can come up with. A lot of times, and just about almost all cases, their motivation is not financial. Their motivation is their art, their craft, their work. They're trying to have an impact on the world. And I think inherently we all have that, right?
Yes. If you are receiving money from your art, you might start saying, oh, okay, I got a lot of money when I did it this way. I've seen visual artists, painters do that. Oh gosh, this canvas really sold. This one didn't. I'm going to do more in this. So whenever there's money involved, that's going to and then that's going to pull you over to the lowest common denominator, probably. Maybe you'll have really great patrons that like the really interesting work. But the idea that we need to reward things, people need to get paid. And if they get paid for something, they do better. And that kind of reward capitalistic idea, that's not so much. But for instance, with patents in medicine, if we didn't have patents in medicine, we'd have better medicine. It doesn't cause innovation. It causes companies to want to have a product that can be patented. Not a product that works, but a product that can be patented. So whenever, and the financial reward for your actions is like gaming the system. You're getting points for something, and what you're doing is not its own reward. I ran into this with learning a language online and one of those gamified things on my phone. I learned how to cheat the system and get up on the leaderboard by doing things that didn't help me learn the language better, but just made me earn more points. And so that's what's happened in our whole society, really, is that people are just earning more points. They're not creating better things. They're not doing better work. So that the reward becomes the abstract thing that everybody works for rather than the thing itself. There's a great documentary on this kind of thing by Adam Curtis, is that his name, who did The Century of the Self, called The Trap. And it's about the game theoretic economy. It's a real free market approach, and it completely distorted all the ways that institutions are run. And we're probably seeing the result of that kind of thinking that came out during the Reagan years and the Thatcher years to totally gamify everything is where this AI stuff is going. If you think that kind of sick reward system with capitalism was bad, just wait till AI is implemented with its nudge system and its social credit system and stuff. It would be an absolute horror.
Yeah, Adam Curtis, he's done some amazing films. I haven't heard that name in a while. So
In a while, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. And I think is that one of his newer films? Because I think somebody told me that he did come out with something recently.
Yeah, it talks about Clinton and Thatcher and Reagan. Yeah, I think it must have come out in the 90s, I think.
So and this is my last point, is would something like, and again, you don't want to give government more power, more influence, more authority over you, but in a world where we didn't strip away imagination, creativity, and we let people blossom into whatever direction they want to go, could a universal basic income where we could just focus on the things that make us fulfilled and happy and not the mindless jobs that are unfulfilling? Are you familiar with that book, Tribe? What was the author? Sebastian Younger or Sebastian something?
Yeah.
It was an interesting book because he was in Afghanistan for some like documentaries or some type of work he was doing there. He's with these military people who were at like the most dangerous part of Afghanistan, and everybody was talking about how like they couldn't wait to get home because any day could be their last day and how dangerous it was being there and whatever. So he finally leaves, and then 6 months later or a year later, something like that, he reconnects with all these army guys or whatever branch of the military they're in. And they're all depressed and they're all unhappy. And I don't get it. You could not wait to come home. You were in a dangerous place and all this stuff. And after talking to them, talking to many of them that were there, they were all unhappy or depressed and unfulfilled now because they're in a life that didn't really give them fulfillment. They had jobs that weren't really that important. They didn't have community. They didn't have, I always talk about how like the bond between firefighters or pro athletes who have this mentality of when it's a big World Cup game or the Super Bowl, like you feel like you're going to war with your brothers. And there's a bond, right? There's a bond when you guys are working together to accomplish something, or in their case, to stay alive. And a lot of our lives that we live now is not any of that. You don't get any of that. You don't get any of that natural rewards, right?
Yeah.
Of feeling important or whatnot.
Yeah. So absolutely not on the UBI. Absolutely not. What people want and need is responsibility and to have some sense of self-sufficiency so that they feel like they're doing something important and they feel like they have control of their lives, because it's their job to get up in the morning and take care of the animals, do whatever, make the thing that you make. And what's missing in our modern society is the meaningless jobs. You could have a meaningless job and that you're just flipping hamburgers or something like that. But if you do it in a local cafe where you know everybody there and you serve them the food and they thank you and there's reciprocity and you feel important because you're contributing to your community in a way where you know the people that are getting your product, But if you work in a factory or something and you're making shoes, you never hear from anybody say, I love these shoes. They made my feet so much better. You never get that feedback from what you did with your 8 hours. So that's part of the problem with modern society is everybody is separated from the chain, the community, the ecosystem where there's a lot of give and take all the time. And so you're caring for other people. You may be doing it for a living, you're getting paid for it, but you're providing something that somebody else finds useful. And with UBI, that's the cheese in the trap. That'll give the government a reason to control your life. And you never want to give a government the reason to control your life. If everybody gets $1,000 a month in UBI, rents and mortgages will go up accordingly, $1,000 within months. That'll even out this. People don't need spare time so much as they need to spend their time meaningfully in the way that I've said. And then their free time they can do, like I work as a farmer during the day and then I do research and write novels. I find time for it because I enjoy that. But the government shouldn't hand people money because it feels good to work. It feels good to work for sustenance. But the government should do is not take money from people. Right now, the poor are being taxed, which is absolutely ridiculous. The government should never tax people to own a piece of land, which you need to survive. Every human being has a right to a little patch of land to build a house on, to put a garden in. Property tax for single homes should be done away with. Yeah, tax people like Bill Gates that are trying to buy up all this farmland to prevent him from owning and hoarding all that. Tax him, but not the individuals. Provide mass transportation for people, even out in the rural areas, that's reliable and convenient and safe. And then the people won't need so much money. People won't need so much money. We've done all sorts of things to make it really impossible for people to own a home with interest rates and insurance and everything. And that's all the various programs that have been instituted. If we could just go back, if we could dial back 100 or 200 years or something like that, we could get the way the economy was run then, probably more people would be able to own a little home.
Yeah, I agree with you on all that 100%. My concern is the system's rigged against the average person. Like you said, you're taxing poor people. People aren't making enough money to survive. People aren't making enough money to like just own something. Like you said, be a homeowner. So people say a big part of being a homeowner was you feel like you're part of the community. Now I own a part of land in this community. I'm a part of it. I have a little bit more incentive to care about the community because I'm permanently here. This is where my family's going to be raised. This is all these type of things. I'm a neighbor. I have neighbors. But the system's rigged. This rags to riches idea of coming to America is, I see what my parents, like I said, I was born in Europe. I came here. A lot of Europeans came from nothing. My parents were born in a house with no running water. They were farmers. They didn't feel poor. They didn't seem poor. They didn't act poor. I would go back to Portugal every summer and I'm like, wow, everybody seems really happy for not having.
They eat like kings.
Exactly. And then you come to America and they're like, oh, we come here for opportunity and financial wealth and all these things. And you realize, oh, but now you're stressed. Now you have less free time. Now you're less fulfilled. You're less happy. I'm not sure the price is worth it. And it's almost, I had a song I wrote called Sabotage the American Dream about the trickery of being like, you've been tricked to come here. You'll be better off and happier. And then you get so lost in this journey of looking for financial gain that you lose all the things that made you happy before the financial gain, and the community, the being around others, all these other things that also brought happiness. And you sacrifice one for another, but the other thing that you thought was going to bring you happiness, which is more ones and zeros in the bank account or a bigger house or newer car or whatever, is temporary happiness. It's not true fulfillment. But yeah, I just see it now with so many young kids, like just struggling they feel they're angry because they look at the Andrew Tates, they look at the Nick Fuenteses, they look at all these people who are maybe extreme, but they connect with it because they're screaming that, hey, the system's rigged and it's rigged against you. You're not going to make enough money to afford a house. You're not going to make enough money to do this or do that. And the rich just keep getting richer. COVID killed small businesses and funneled all the wealth to the top 1%. The Amazons got richer. The big box stores like Walmart got richer. And then the mom and pop businesses struggled. A lot of them went out of business. And they just look at that and they're like, yeah. And most of the people who are making money they're contributing nothing to society, right? They're taking money that's already made and then making money out of money, where it's harder and harder to open up a little coffee shop and say, hey, I'm going to contribute to society by opening up this little coffee shop and hopefully make enough money to survive. If you live in Massachusetts, it's harder and harder to have a business. There's the amount of paperwork and licenses and certifications that it's required to own a business is just absurd. And so it's weird because I agree with you, but you definitely don't want to give government any extra power, but I can see the frustration growing and I don't know what the solution is.
There's a lot of angry young men and they're rightfully angry, but they need to know who to be angry at. And that is the financial sector and the banking system. Come on. In 1913, the Federal Reserve came into power, giving the power to private banks to create U.S. legal tender. And they did what you expected them to do. They made money for themselves. Of course they did. And that needs to end. The Federal Reserve, fractional reserve banking needs to end. People don't need to be paying so much interest to outside the community. You used to have community banks that would loan money to buy houses and businesses in that community. And so if you paid interest to that bank, that went into your community, which then loaned other money. And it used to, in the old days, a bank, you could bank at that bank if you could see the steeple from the village church, and that defined that banking region. It was within sight of that steeple. And so that the money for the interest never leaves the area where the actual homes and businesses are. It keeps getting reinvested. And when now we have global banking and our interest for our houses just goes out of the community. And it's no wonder that the communities are bankrupt. So we need to get rid of fractional reserve banking. We need to go back to greenbacks, which is a fiat dollar, which can be printed to then build infrastructure, and then people can pay to use it. You don't need a tax. We need to stop taxing people because unless they are hoarding land or have natural resources or something like that, they shouldn't take the things that they don't deserve to have. But yeah, it's not that hard really to think of. It's so obvious what sort of mechanisms are in place that are making the poor and the rich richer. And we could fix that. It's just so funny. We fight amongst ourselves over tribal leaders, which president or politician or whatever, or we're so distracted so easily. If we all came together and just said, yeah, the banks shouldn't be the one printing the money. Can we just stop that one thing? That would really do a lot.
Yeah, I've had G. Edward Griffin on, who wrote the book, Jekyll, or the Creatures from Jekyll Island. Yeah, it's a classic book. And the Zeitgeist movement talked about it and many others. James Corbett has a great documentary, The Century of Enslavement, about the history of the Fed, which is another really good one. People need to learn, about this stuff because it's...
Do you know Bill Still's documentary? That's an old one. And I think he's one of the best in terms of what kind of looks at the history of monetary policy and looks at the mechanisms that we could change to have a better economy. And I've also worked with the Public Banking Institute with Ellen Brown. That's really important, the idea of community banks and state banks. That's something that we can work on now. And I recently interviewed Teresa Coraggio, who wrote a book called How to Dismantle an Empire, which gives a history of debt-backed currency and also gold-backed currency. Oddly enough, I didn't realize how detrimental it is to back gold in currency, rather than with other ideas with greenbacks, you back it with infrastructure, or with Ben Franklin's idea, you back the currency with mortgages on land in the community. It sounds complicated because if you haven't talked about where does money come from, a lot of people don't know where it comes from. How is it created? That's really important.
Yeah. And what gives it its value? How do you control its value? Inflation. Yeah. All these things are super important. And the petrodollar, right? You can go down the history of that too, and how we got off the gold standard and created the petrodollar. And
yeah, the gold standard is nice in that you can always turn in your dollar bills for gold, and it's definitely backed by something. But how do you get that gold? You have to steal it from somebody else or enslave somebody or tax people. So it's not, and then it just sits there in a vault and does nothing. So it's just abstract. Let's just pretend the gold is in the vault. Then does it have the same value if nobody knows it's not there? Because I'll tell you what, Fort Knox is probably empty.
yeah, a lot of people have said that. Yeah. I think a lot of us believe that. Dr. Jack Cruz, are you familiar with him? He's a really fascinating guy, but I think is he in Argentina? Well, one of the Latin American countries that are now using Bitcoin as a currency. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think it is a solution, or is it just going to be another mechanism of control?
I don't know. I didn't like Bitcoin because every time you used it, it required more and more energy to do the mining, to do the blockchain. And so it would be more and more energy inefficient as it grew. I think blockchain could be a very good thing to control government spending so that we could see where the government is spending money and where it's going. When you need the full transparency on something, then use the blockchain for something like that. I think they could be useful there to prevent counterfeiting. It would be good. So if you want to control someone or a group, it's good. So we want to control the government, but the danger is that we'll be controlled by blockchain currency. So
yeah, I think there's going to be some type of digital central currency.
You're going to try.
Yeah. Right. And that's the part and talking about normalizing things. I think that's where I don't know if Bitcoin was a part of the plan, because obviously there's some mystery about where it came from, the origin story of it, but it is helping, maybe accidentally helping with normalizing digital currency because it's become mainstream due to the popularity of it.
I understand why you would want to do anonymous transactions online, and I think it's good for that. But now it's so regulated that it's pointless. You lost your freedom with Bitcoin now.
Paul, I think it was, I forget which stand-up comedian said it, but he said that politicians should look like NASCAR drivers. They should have all the sponsors who pay, all the lobbyists who gave them money should be reflected on their clothes, so then why they're voting for or against stuff. Because
I don't want to call them legislators anymore because that gives them the idea that they're going to create laws. I don't think that they should be doing that. We have just basic general laws: don't kill, don't do. We don't need new laws every week. We don't just build the infrastructure. Have a border. I think a country needs a border. Maintain the border, but let the people decide who comes in. You sponsor a family come over. You sponsor a cousin to come over. We used to do the immigration that way. There were always sponsors.
That's how we got here. That's how my family got here. We had family that was here that sponsored them, that were established. They already had a job waiting for them.
That way the immigrants don't need any kind of welfare because you're coming into a community that's going to help them survive and get a job and get set up. Yeah, that's the way we used to do things. Well, we could do that again. That way the decision making is pushed down to the lower level, to the people too, about immigration. And we could have a national guard. We don't need a standing army. Eliminate all that.
Yeah, I hope that this podcast gets people to rethink the way society is and the way it has to be, and maybe get them to look at things outside the box. And yeah, there's so many issues. It's hard to know where to start, but hopefully we're trending in a direction of people at least at some point, maybe not physically revolting, but maybe mentally revolting against the system, where they're like, hey, you know what, maybe things are a little rigged against me, and maybe I should rethink things and speak out against it or whatnot. But for people listening who, first of all, thank you so much for taking time to chat. You've taken I was going to tell you that I was going to send you the podcast I did with Dr. Hennessy Powell from the telepathy tapes because I'm intrigued with your opinion of it after listening to it.
I'll give it more serious consideration. I should have, but I didn't have time to go through it. But
yeah, it's interesting, but if you're not sick of hearing my voice already, because I feel like you've been doing a lot of listening of Ricky of late, then then I'll send that to you. And like I said, I'm intrigued with your perspective on it. But for people listening who's intrigued with your perspective on all the things you write about, where can people keep up with your work? What social media platforms are you on? If you have multiple Substacks or whatever it may be, what are they called so people can find them? And of course, I'll put all these links in the show description also.
I think I just have two main websites. So I got a TikTok and Instagram or whatever, but that's just silly stuff there. Little advertisements or whatever. You can try to find me over there as VN Alexander, or maybe Red and Alexa IROT, which is Tori Alexander backwards. I forget, that's on Instagram. That's my handle. But basically my website, vnalexander.com, has most everything, has my literary work, my novels. It has my CV there, which a connection to my CV, which is all my scientific work, if anybody is interested in the biosemiotics and things like that. And then I have quite a few links to other work that goes to my science videos, where I have explanatory videos about different things in complex systems and how we can think of ourselves as being purposeful and how we can think of nature as having purpose. Yeah, so vnalexander.com, and also my Substack, where I critique AI and transhumanism and technocracy. Mostly I'm explaining how it's not going to work. They can try to do it, but it's going to fail. It's not going to work. Maybe at some point in the future, we will be at a point where we could do really crazy, incredible things, but we're not there yet. So that's posthumousstyle.substack.com. Oh, I lost you're muted.
I'm muted. Oh, yeah, I've only done this for how many years? I still mess up from time to time. But yeah, the purpose thing in Mother Nature is interesting, because there are people who explore the idea that maybe what made humans evolve in the rate that other forms of intelligent species in the natural world didn't seem to evolve in the same rate. Were we getting information from somewhere else? Were we, I don't know, did we come from another planet? All these other interesting things? Because it does seem like the humans specifically, there's a lot more mystery to how we've evolved.
Quite a bit more advanced than the runners up, which are dolphins and whales or something like that. They seem to be pretty intelligent too. I wanted to say that the title on this, The Biologist Mistress, Rethinking Self-Organization in Art, Literature, and Nature. I have to explain that title because people want to understand the biologist mistress. So there's a very famous evolutionary theorist who was very much in determinism named Haldane. And he said, teleology is the study of purpose in nature. It's an old form of philosophy that went out of style with Darwinism and materialism and Newton and so forth. But he said teleology is like a mistress to a biologist. He can't live without her, but he doesn't want to be seen with her in public. And obviously biology is, there's so much purpose and function involved, right? And everything functions for a reason. And it's just, biology is teleology. Biology is the study of purpose. So that's why that book has that weird title. And I just thought I'd explain that rather than leaving it there.
No, I'm glad you did, because I think people will appreciate the creativity in the title a lot more now. Awesome. Yeah. And I'll put links to your website, your social media platform.
Oh, and I have a new novel coming out. This is my Nabokovian novel. It's called The Girly Playhouse. And that's a picture of a cabaret door, and the signs say, "Not in our neighborhood, strippers not welcome." And it's about the problems of how society deals with feminine sexuality. And it's a social satire. It's quite funny.
It is interesting. I've had Naomi Wolf. I'm sure you're familiar with her.
Yep.
She's been on in the past, but I had her on. We didn't talk about feminism. We talked about COVID at the time because she was pretty outspoken about that. But it is a important topic, and it is fascinating to hear people's perspective on it. And so, yeah, we'll definitely, is that out yet? Or,
It's coming out in April.
okay,
And
awesome.
one of the things that I mentioned this to you is that we hear about sex and violence all the time, and we're worried about our kids are going to get it online, and we got to censor movies with sex and violence all the time. It's part of the rating systems and so forth. But has anybody stopped to say, why do we talk about sex and violence all the time as if they go together like peanut butter and jelly?
You think because they're both taboo, maybe because they're both stuff you might want to protect, or maybe they're two things that you think adults can consume.
And children can't? Yes. And that's why they got lumped together. But violence is glorified in all the war movies. Do we have positive representations of sex? Do we have positive stories about passionate married couples on the screen? Whenever I see in the first scene of a movie a passionate married couple, I go, oh my God, she's not going to live to the next scene because they got to kill her off. So now the hero can go around killing everybody that killed his wife. It's always, there's no positive representations of healthy love or anything like that. I know I'm not saying don't show it on screen or anything, but when you see sex on film, on screens, it's usually, people usually aren't married. There's some sort of violent thing that's.
Is it because you think you're tapping into, I guess, The Notebook? Don't remember when I saw it. That was a while ago, so I don't remember if it was a romantic story. I don't remember if there's any violence in it, but that seemed to be a kind of a more romantic, passionate love story that didn't really involve violence. But aren't they both two very primitive things about humans? It's almost so inherent in us, where lust, desire, it just seems like it sells because you're tapping into something that maybe we have less control over.
Two things that we're less able to control. And then the answer is to suppress it or something in the way. But then what we're left with is really bad versions of sex. And sometimes the violence is okay if it's the patriotic or something, but still you're going to war, killing people that don't want to be killed and stuff. That's probably why they're so censored. It's those things about human nature that we feel less comfortable about. We're unable to control all sorts of passions and stuff. But what we have is really horrible. What the censorship hasn't really worked.
Yeah, growing up in Portugal, right, and going back to Portugal, they used to show breasts on everything. It wasn't a big deal. It was just breasts. And then you come to America, and it's, hey, men can show their nipples, but not women, even though it's the exact same.
Look at Renaissance painting or medieval painting with all the Madonnas nursing her child. And now breasts are seen as something dirty. I'll leave you with one. AI was used by Facebook to find nipples on pictures and get rid of those when they could have used that to find child pornography and keep child pornography off, but they didn't. They could have done that. No, what did they go after? Women's nipples. So the Madonna feeding her baby is.
Yeah, it is funny how many stories there are of that. Like Barry Crimmins was a comedian from Massachusetts he was a part of he was molested as a child, and he was always very much against, like, a activist against pedophilia and whatnot. And then he was a part of a giant AOL lawsuit that exposed the fact that AIM knew that pedophiles were basically trading child porn and didn't care. Like, they never and it got exposed in court. And Barry Crimmins, in this documentary, actually, it tells this story a little bit. And then you see, like, X, before Elon Musk purchased it, there was tons of people that would tweet, look at this account, look at that account, X, I've reported this account, why is it still up? And there's no explanation to why other things get blocked and censored immediately, and then this type of stuff doesn't.
I guess we know why. We lived in a really effed up world.
Yeah, no.
I want to say something too about this issue. We just keep talking. So I wrote this book in the 1990s when I was more concerned about feminist issues and being a young woman in New York City. And I couldn't get, I was at the Graduate Center and in City University, New York, and they have a press called the Feminist Press. And I said, oh, this is perfect press. I'm a student here. Will you please publish it? And they rejected it, saying that it objectified women by making them, it's not, I wanted to represent feminine sexuality without any of the ghettoization, any of the negative thing, try to make it in an ideal situation, an ideal before the fall kind of thing. And no, you're objectifying women because they're sexually attractive. Fast forward 30 years later, and we have men dressing up as strippers, dancing for preschoolers, and now it's okay. So when women did it, it was objectification. And when men do it, it's self-expression. Something's wrong here. I think we're looking at misogyny both ways. So what happened? And now there's an editor at Feminist Press who is a man who calls himself a woman. They're publishing books by men who call themselves women, the feminist press. And some of their titles are like, so what if I'm a punta, which means, so what if I'm a whore? There are many stories about trans prostitutes and stuff. Hey, I'm a woman, and that's not the sort of issues that women are concerned about. We're concerned about our children. And yeah, we don't need to hear about a trans woman prostitute. That's not a feminist issue.
Well, I'm actually very surprised that the feminist movement there has been pushback, but that there hasn't been more pushback sooner, because this all does seem very anti-woman. It doesn't seem like you're celebrating women. It seems like you're almost making a mockery of it.
I'm making a mockery. That's a travesty. Transvestite was the right word for that. That's a travesty. That's not a woman. That's woman face.
Yes, it is. That's so funny. I've never heard a reference that way. It is woman.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
Thank you so much, Tori. I really appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I might want to do a roundtable with you and Dr. Jessica Rose one of these days. I feel like there'd be some chemistry there. She's much like yourself, very interesting, very easy to have long conversations with. And
I've met her.
Oh, have you? Yeah.
Because Dr. Jack.
Of course.
Yeah, we've been in the same room together. That's about it. But yeah, I know her work and everything. Yeah, she's a hoot.
Yeah, she is a hoot. She is fun to talk to. Maybe we'll have to set that up in the near future. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to chat. It's always a pleasure. I will send you links to the show once it's up and live. Feel free to post it, share it, and where you would like. All my stuff is open source. It's about getting the information out there. And thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully we talk again soon.
Thank you, Ricky. All right.
Thanks, Tori. Take care.
Bye.